It was Socrates that was able to stop the sophist movement, that all truths were relative. Socrates and his followers, Plato and Aristotle, established the foundation or the core elements of what we call Western philosophy. Socrates is regarded as the father of philosophy. But interesting thing about Socrates is that he never wrote philosophy. It was his student, Plato, who's considered to be one of our greatest geniuses in philosophy in the Western tradition, is the one who wrote. What makes this the foundation of Western tradition is that Socrates walked around Athens teaching, engaging young people in doing philosophy. Plato was one of his pupils that followed him around town. And this continued, and Plato got into some problems with the law because they didn't like him doing his philosophy, and he ended up on the wrong side of the people in town. But in any case, Plato is inspired by Socrates' death. Socrates dies. Plato is inspired by his death because he died for his philosophy. And Plato himself is a writer and comes from a prominent family. And he writes, presents us in the modern time with Socrates' philosophy, and then goes on to do his own philosophy. And Plato wrote on all kinds of topics about the government, morality. All right, Aristotle started logic. The influence of these philosophers' writings on society was immense. Plato started a school called the Academy, and later Aristotle entered that school, came in as a student, and then became a professor in Plato's school. And Aristotle wrote enormously as well, right? And greatly influencing society. He's the father of biology, psychology. He started logic, which allows you to have your computers nowadays. Very influential individuals, right? Socrates were able to argue using a form we call it abstract reasoning, going backwards to show that some truths are necessarily true. Okay, and we're going to learn about abstract argument in this particular course. All right, so there are some areas where things are relative, but some areas you can see intellectually these are absolutely true. This is the real major influence of what we call Western philosophy. Going forward a little bit, the modern philosophers, notice the time, 15 to 1700. We're not talking about modern like today, contemporary. It's a new way of thinking about the world. Modern is a new way of thinking about the world. After the passing of Aristotle in 322 BC, you don't have a new way of thinking of the world until the rise of René Descartes. All right. And René Descartes directly pushed against Aristotle's theory. Not to say that they're wrong, but we have a deeper way, another way of approaching reality, right? And so, and during this time, philosophy itself is inundated by the influence of religion and the new political system. And Descartes himself argues, okay, the first major philosopher who argues for the existence of God, which eventually gives rise to what we call the philosophy of religion. Okay, Descartes is seen as the father of modern philosophy because he had a new way of looking at reality. And what is that way? He saw, if you look at like the other philosophers, mostly scientific thinking people, looking at the external world, Descartes realized, if you look into his own mind, that he could doubt anything in front of him, anything around him, except for his own existence. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. I can look at reality, begin with recognizing my own existence. And from that, begin to go explore everything else. This was an intuitive way of looking at the truth, completely different from previous ways of looking at the truth. Truth that come from within. So the people of this time that followed Descartes began in a dismantling of the previous ways. They either rejected abstract reasoning, like some philosophers like David Hume, or just ignored it for a new way of looking at truth, like René Descartes. Okay, and so it's not that these methods of reasoning was wrong, but now we have a new thing in front of us. We have this world to make sense of, this physical world. We want to embrace it with the full empirical sense. Those who rejected Descartes, okay, will later be called empiricists. They're going to use the idea that true knowledge should be based on sense experience directly, not intuition, which are internal truths. Okay. Descartes recognized as a father of modern philosophy for many, many reasons, but he's also a great mathematician. He gives us analytical geometry, and he's also recognized as a man of science. He worked on this, trying to define light and how it works. Okay. This concludes my intro to the history of philosophy. And the takeaway that in the beginning, in the middle, is Socrates. Philosophers before Socrates are pre-Socratic philosophers. And in between, you have the Sophists, and then you have the Socratic philosophers, the Plato, Aristotle, Descartes. It's not just these philosophers, but any philosopher who worked during this time period with that same kind of mentality. Okay. And then you have the modern philosophers, which rises with Rene Descartes. But there's many other divisions of philosophy, but this gives you the flavor of it all. Once you understand Socrates, pre-Socratic philosophers, and post-Socratic philosophers, the major one being modern philosophers, for this brief introduction into the history of philosophy.